Hello and welcome to the I Can Do podcast with Benjamin Lee. We're here to talk about tips and strategies to have an I Can Do mindset when it comes to faith, family, fitness, and food. Let's go. Here's your host, Benjamin Lee.
Hello and welcome. I am Benjamin Lee. Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode. I hope and pray all is well with you. Well, it was going to be the very first time that I preached in front of a really big audience. I want to take you back a long time ago to Rockford, Illinois. I was living there at the time and working there with Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. The preacher where I was attending, Brother Samuel Pounds, had asked me if I could fill in for him on a particular Sunday night. And I was more than happy. I was thrilled that he asked me. And so I said yes. But there was just one major problem. I had no idea what I was doing when it came to writing a sermon or putting a sermon together. But I did say yes. Now, for weeks, I tried to figure out what I was going to preach. That was one of the bigger problems. And then really, after I figured out what I was going to preach, how was I actually going to put it all together? The more I think about this story, I'm wondering if it wasn't pride on my part to simply have asked him that I needed some help or to ask him for some help. But nonetheless, I don't know if I actually did that. So I was trying to figure all of this out on my own. So being in pharmaceutical sales during that time, I was in my car quite a bit. My car was basically my office, and I would listen to a number of sermons while I was on the road. During that time, I was listening to the cassette tapes. And there was a sermon that really stood out to me, that really stuck with me. It was called One More Night with the Frogs. The sermon was from a preacher named Leroy Butler. And I told myself, that's the sermon that I am going to preach. So that was the sermon that I decided I was going to do. I was going to call my sermon One More Night with the Frogs. So what I did, I listened to Leroy's sermon over and over and over again. And by the time I preached it, I almost began to call myself Leroy because I had listened to that sermon so much. So eventually the time came, Sunday night came, for me to preach my lesson, One More Night with the Frogs. I got up to the pulpit. I felt really confident. My mom was there, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. My girlfriend at the time was there. Even my Pfizer employees, or colleagues rather, they were there in the audience as well. So the time came, and I preached a sermon. I got some great feedback from the sermon, and I thought everything worked out pretty well for the most part. But then there was just one major problem. Brother Leroy Butler had been invited to come to our congregation to preach a number of lessons for us about 3 months later. So I want you to think about this. I preached his sermon. I didn't give him any credit. And now 3 months later, he's coming to hold a meeting for us. And I knew then that I was going to be exposed for the fraud that I was, because it was really his sermon. It wasn't my sermon. So that first Sunday night when he was there, he did show up and he was there. I sat in great fear and anticipation in the pew waiting for him to preach One More Night with the Frogs. But that Sunday morning, that Sunday afternoon, that Sunday night, he didn't preach it. But there was still Monday through Friday. So I was sure he was going to preach this sermon. Those, I have to tell you, those were some of the hardest nights. And I went to each of the sermons that he preached, each of the services during that week. And I was nervous, and I never told him. I felt so bad that I took his sermon. But he never preached the sermon One More Night with the Frogs. A couple of years ago, I believe my Aunt Rachel gave me a recording of that sermon. She had a copy of that cassette tape, and so I decided to listen to it. And I think I almost passed out after hearing how bad that sermon really was, or at least how bad I messed everything up. The sermon that he preached, Leroy Butler, that sermon that I was listening to in the car, that was a really good sermon. But the one that I had preached, it was absolutely awful. And it was so bad that I couldn't even listen to my own self the entire time. I ended up turning off the cassette tape. Well, today I want to talk to you about One More Night with the Frogs. You may have been wondering, what does this mean? What's he talking about? And what was the sermon One More Night with the Frogs even about? Well, I'm so glad that you asked. In the book of Exodus, we find the Israelites in bondage in Egypt, yet God is going to deliver them. What we find is that God sent 10 plagues upon Egypt to demonstrate his power. In Exodus chapter 8, we find the account of the land being consumed with frogs. So I want you to imagine how awful that must have been, where there were frogs everywhere. Let me just read a couple of verses from Exodus chapter 8. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite your whole territory with frogs. The Nile will swarm with frogs, which will come up and go into your house and into your bedroom and on your bed and into the houses of your servants and on your people and into your ovens and into your kneading bowls. So the frogs will come up on you and your people and all your servants.'" Now imagine if you were there, just how terrible that really would have been. If you were to experience this, how soon would you want those frogs to depart? How soon would you ask God for those frogs to be taken away? I think we're all on the same page. I think we would say immediately, right? Yet Pharaoh said something very interesting in the chapter. In Exodus chapter 8, it would go on to say, "Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, 'Entreat the Lord that he remove the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go that they sacrifice to the Lord.' Moses said to Pharaoh, 'The honor is yours to tell me, when shall I entreat for you and your servants and your people that the frogs be destroyed from you and your houses, that they may be left only in the Nile?' Then he said, 'Tomorrow.'" Think about that. He said, "Tomorrow." So he said, "May it be according to your word, Moses speaking, that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God." Isn't that shocking that Pharaoh would say, "Get rid of the frogs tomorrow"? Why wouldn't he just say, "Get rid of the frogs right now"? They're everywhere. They're in the bedrooms, on the beds. They're in everyone's house. They're in the ovens. They're everywhere. And yet he says, "Well, get rid of them tomorrow." The stench, the infestation of frogs, the sound of the frogs should have been enough for him to say, "Get rid of them right now." But that wasn't his answer. Now here's what we know. We know that Pharaoh was a stubborn man. We know that he would learn the hard way. We know that he had no respect or honor and did not give glory to God. There are so many lessons to learn from this story, this idea of one more night with the frogs, whether it's pride, the power of God that's on display. There's so many things that we could talk about. One of the biggest thoughts that I want to share with you from this story is also the idea of tomorrow. It can be so easy to say, "Tomorrow I will," then fill in the blank. "Tomorrow I will do this," or "Tomorrow I will take care of that matter." It can be easy to delay improving one situation immediately. Yet many times I have found myself, I am guilty, thinking along those lines. Tomorrow I will be able to do this. One more night with the frogs is a mentality. This idea of saying tomorrow, it's a mentality that we must avoid. You see, it's a delayed kind of mindset. It's a putting off kind of mindset. It's a I'll worry about it later kind of thinking. One more night with the frogs isn't going to work. Why delay when things can begin to change immediately? I think about sin when I consider one more night with the frogs. It can be easy to stay in a sinful situation with the mindset of, well, I will work on this tomorrow. I will stop this tomorrow. Or what about food? Tomorrow I will start to eat better. Or what about exercise? Tomorrow, or maybe it's the best day of the week, Monday, I will get a fresh start and start moving again. Instead of one more night with the frogs, how about we have a right now mentality? The best time to take that first step is right now. Why stay in that not ideal situation, that situation that is just terrible, when you can begin to take action right now, or a situation that you know you need to improve upon, that you can begin to take action immediately? This podcast is all about tips and strategies. It's about a mindset, having an I can do mentality when it comes to faith, family, fitness, and food. And the applications here are so many. I think about the woman Jesus spoke to in John chapter 8. Remember her who was caught in adultery? He told this woman, go and sin no more. We need to listen to that. Her new start wasn't to begin the next day or later on, but rather at that very moment. He said, go and sin no more. When it comes to family, why wait until tomorrow morning or tomorrow night to plan for a vacation or to spend time with your family or to let someone know that you love them? Because the reality is tomorrow is not promised, which is why we need to do it today. Hug our children today, our spouse today. Let them know that we love them. And then do it all over again tomorrow and the next day after that. When it comes to fitness, if you're in a place where you can, hit the pause button here in just a moment, maybe you've been putting off doing your exercise like you know you should be, hit the pause button on this podcast and give me 10 push-ups, all right? And give me some burpees along the way too. And then make sure you turn it back on and listen to the rest of it, all right? But if you've been delaying getting into shape, what are you waiting for? Why? One more night with the frogs isn't going to help you out. Now is the time for you to do it. When it comes to food, we just got to throw that food out that we've had in our house that we know is a trigger for us. And we don't have to wait until tomorrow, or at least we should not wait until tomorrow, because if we do, more than likely we are probably going to eat it tonight. So let's just get rid of it right now, and that will help us to get one step closer to our goals. One more night with the frogs simply will not work. Take action today and get moving forward. Pharaoh was foolish. I have been very foolish at times, having this mindset of tomorrow. What about you? My friend, today is the day. Tonight is the night. Do it now. Get the ball moving. Go. One more night with the frogs. That's not a winning mentality. I can do. That's a winning mentality. Right now, that's a winning mentality. Do it now and watch what happens. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe and leave me a comment to help me spread the word of this podcast. And remember, I can do, so can you.